Chapter 4. Fighting back shivers, Saria followed the others along the winding track. They'd been out in the snow all morning, Andorn now leading the group as he did his best to follow the tracks the thugs had left behind the previous day. Fresh snow had fallen on top, but not enough among the trees to entirely obscure the footprints made earlier. Still, it required his skills to follow it through the more open areas of the forest, or where no snow had managed to reach in some time, but the ground was frozen solid, unable to bend to the force of a boot. Yarlin had barely stopped grumbling about the cold, and even Mira's usually cheerful talking had given way to a grim silence. Suddenly, Andorn held up a hand and stopped. Appearing to be listening, he held still, his eyes scanning the forest in front of them. Walking as deftly and silently as she could across the snow, Saria moved slowly to his side, knowing it would be beneficial for her to look as well. Few humans had eyesight as keen as an elf's. Up ahead, just beyond the next line of trees, was a small clearing. She could just make out a hut and the movement of someone near it. They were slowly walking around it, stomping as if to generate more heat and keep warm. A guard of some sort. In hushed whispers, she mentioned this to Andorn. He nodded in response, as if he was already aware, but wanted confirmation. "I think there's a second inside," he added, "inside the hut." Looking again, she focused past the guard, but for some time she saw nothing, and then there was a flash of something moving past the small window inside.
"Yes, at least two of them."
Andorn drew a dagger and motioned for her to ready her weapon as well. It was all the signal the rest of their group needed to do the same as quietly as they could. "We'll sneak around to the side," Andorn whispered when Yarlin, Thorgrim, and Mira came a little closer. "Give us 5 minutes, and we'll all charge together." The others nodded, as Andorn beckoned for Saria to follow. Although she knew he'd be counting as well, she did so in her head, making her way to the 300 seconds he'd allocated them to move silently around the edge of the hut and clearing. The undergrowth was a little less easy to navigate, slowing them down and making it obvious the path they'd come in on was used at least semi-regularly. Saria must have been counting faster than Andorn, her increased heart rate in anticipation of the approaching battle affecting her ability to accurately keep track of passing time. Eventually, he stopped, gave her a nod, and rushed forward. Less than a second later, she heard Yarlin and Thorgrim cry out as they also charged the rest of the way through the undergrowth. It took the guard a moment to react, his jaw dropping open in surprise as Yarlin hurtled toward them. Saria didn't think she and Andorn had been noticed as they jogged forward far more quietly. As soon as her bow was in a good range without too many trees in the way, she stopped and notched an arrow. Andorn carried on past her, but kept to one side, evidently intending to move around the other side of the hut. Thorgrim loosed a bolt from his crossbow barely seconds before she fired. The guard grunted as they both managed to hit him, and then Yarlin was upon him, their blades clashing loudly in the otherwise quiet clearing. Leaving the guard to her companions, Saria followed Andorn around the building. She caught up with him just in time to see him hurl a dagger at another scruffy male coming out of the door on the far side of the hut. Grabbing another arrow, she prepared to fire, but the thug rushed them too quickly. Dropping the bow and arrow, she quickly drew the short sword she carried instead, and parried the blow he had aimed at her. She must have looked like the easier target of the two of them, but she'd refused to give quarter, focusing on merely defending herself and distracting her adversary so Andorn could come up and aid her. While she thrust forward, barely committing to the attack to draw his attention, Andorn pulled another dagger from seemingly nowhere and thrust it into the man's ribs. He cried out, pained and surprised. With a serious injury, he never recovered, and between the pair of them they soon had finished him off. Yarlin came rushing around the far side of the building, his hand raised and a yell coming from his wide-open mouth. He stopped dead as he saw they had already dealt with the only other enemy. Trying to hide her shivers and displeasure at having killed for only the 4th time in her life, Saria went to fetch her bow from where she had dropped it. Thankfully, it had come to no harm from being discarded so roughly.
"Just the two?"
she heard Thorgrim ask behind her. For a moment, she didn't turn back around, her breathing quick as tears threatened to fall. While she composed herself, she scanned the tree lining on this side of the forest. The birds were still quiet, silenced by the violence that had occurred near them. While the rest of the party entered the hut, she kept outside, wanting to keep an eye out, just in case there were even more of the men around. The hut looked like it could hold more than the 6 they had encountered across the last 2 days, but there was no way to tell for sure how many would be out there in the forest. The trees were a strange mix. Many evergreens, but also many more deciduous ones, as if this forest had once been managed and cultivated for its variety. It had a sort of wild beauty to it that made Saria feel warm inside. Slowly and silently, she stalked around the hut, noticing that there was a dirt channel where the men must have done the same for possibly weeks. This attack had been long planned, not the reaction of some recent slight or issue. It was entirely possible they had been hampering the townspeople's lives for some time without the people realizing there was an organized force behind it. Either that, or these thugs had banded together here long before they were hired. As she reached the south side of the building and caught a glimpse of the sunlit view beyond the trees, she could understand why. The clearing was on the side of the mountain, far up enough to look out, not just over the town itself, but the lake beside it, and in the snow and ice, it was stunningly beautiful. For a minute, Saria was distracted from her task, staring at the before-now unseen view. This was the sort of thing she'd been glad to leave home for. To see natural wonders she'd never find close to home. It somehow made the aching feet and cold hands worth it. She almost jumped when Andorn appeared beside her, only hearing him take the last couple of steps to be at her side. This would be a wonderful place to live for a while, wouldn't it? His voice was even, containing some of the awe she felt.
If we took a couple of the trees out to open up the view, it would be even better.
The building here would then be viewable to outside eyes as well.
Would it be so bad to not be hiding all the time?
No, not in the right place.
Do you think this is the right place?
It might be. Just might be. Andorn gave her a small smile before taking a final look through the trees and turning back to the hut. Mira was just coming outside, a small knapsack in her hands.
More letters and more money,
Mira said, grinning as she said the last bit. A moment later, she chucked the bag to Andorn. He pulled it open and quickly rifled through the opened letters, each one being tucked into a neat stack. Some looked worn and aged, damp having got to them. I think I've got them in some kind of order, Andorn said a moment later. Maybe we can glean a course of events from them, but they mostly appear to be instructions. The first, suggesting the men set up here. It appears this hut was abandoned before they arrived.
I wonder why,
Mira said as she also noticed the view. Saria shrugged. She was curious about the letters, but also knew no one was keeping watch anymore. As Jarlen and Thorgrim continued to move in and out of the hut, bringing tools out to bury the dead, she went back to the slow, watchful walk around the hut, glad the birds had resumed their song. They were the first line of defense in this sort of situation. They'd startle if anyone but the most stealthy of adversaries approached, and given the quality of the hired men so far, she wasn't expecting anyone of that skill level. Thorgrim and Jarlen grumbled as they dug holes, Mira preparing some food over the stove inside, while Andorn continued to pore over the documents that they'd found. While Saria made her way around yet again, she decided to pay more attention to the tracks the men had left. There were several sets coming from the path her own group had followed to the hut, but there were also others in 2 more directions. One well-traveled, with prints going back and forth in the snow and mud. The other had just one set of prints going and coming back again, barely distinguishable under the night's fresh layer of snow. On her next loop, Saria caught Andorn's eye and beckoned with her hand for him to follow her round. After finishing reading the current letter, he neatened the pile, returned it to the bag, and joined her.
"I found some tracks you might want to see,"
she said when he was close enough she wouldn't have to yell. He nodded and motioned for her to lead the way. It didn't take her long to reach the first set, the well-trodden path leading southwest from the hut. It looked like it cut down into the town, winding down between the rest of the mountain between the lake and the road. They didn't linger, however, as she directed him to the more interesting set of tracks on the southeast side of the hut. Those led into the trees and somewhere else entirely.
"Only 1 or 2 people have been traveling along here,"
Saria said as she pointed out the barely visible footprints underneath the fresh covering of snow.
"And I'd say fairly infrequently, too."
Andor nodded, frowning. Without saying a word to her, he went over to the 2 men they'd killed that morning and lifted up the leg of each so he could study the soles of their boots. As soon as he had put the second one back down again, he came back to her and crouched to view the footprints more closely. It was neither of the 2 men here. Neither of them has feet big enough.
"Someone's still out there?"
she asked, returning her eyes to the tree line and scanning it for movement. Maybe. Or one of the ones we killed yesterday. I think I'd like to see where it leads. Come with me. Before she could object or respond in any way, he called over his shoulder to Yarlin, who was standing beside a shallow hole, cursing as his spade bent against the frozen ground. None of the others objected to the idea of the 2 of them leaving the group and exploring further.
"Mira, come see if you can thaw this a bit,"
Yarlin said, his mind still on his task.
"Breathe fire on it, or whatever cool dragon thing it is you can do."
Saria found herself grinning as she followed Andorn into the forest. The group were working together, even if they were a strange mixture. Perhaps her god had smiled on her the evening she had met them and been forced to share a room with Mira.